this has moved out into the world. He made it international.
And then when they have control of medicine, they can cover up by compartmentalizing and giving false data to the doctors who are compartmentalized and scientists. They can cover up their eugenics program to make sure that real doctors and scientists don't ever discover it, correct?
Right, and the thing is, Lily Kay wrote a book on this. It's the history of molecular medicine and the connection to Rockefeller Foundation and Caltech. It's a very in-depth history of it. She's a professor of history, very well qualified, and it's a very highly acclaimed history of molecular medicine and molecular biology. But in it, she makes the point that the Rockefeller Foundation created molecular biology with the aim of human engineering and social control, and that his goal was to eliminate people in the world who he felt was unfit for life, and to change the minds and the thinking of people by using molecular biology. And
then he pioneered the funding with the British of mind war. That's what Hitler called it, or propaganda.
Right. He turned it international in 1950. What he did, he turned the domestic program over to Ford Foundation, and then he went international, mainly concentrating in Britain with their program of psychological warfare and psychological changing of thinking and mind.
And, Doctor, I want to point something out. You and I didn't talk before the interview. We're not scripting this. I bring up that it then moved to Britain, and you continue with the documentation. Why? I don't come in and throw in little tidbits to show off that I know what's going on. I do that to show we're both saying the same thing because we've read the same mainline history. This is what's really going on. They're poisoning you by design. We're going to get to that. Dr. Russell Blaylock is our guest, an amazing individual. We're so honored to have him with us. We're going to come back and continue with what rules our world. Stay with us. I want everybody out there watching to listen to me very carefully. Everything Dr. Blaylock, neurosurgeon, researcher, lecturer, peer-reviewed publisher, is telling you is on the historical record. The eugenicists developed their plans in the 1850s. They took them into governmental control by the 1930s. They implemented it. The Nazis were just a spin-off of that. That's why all this is happening. That's why the poisoning of the population is happening. And they've got one comeback to all this. They say, well, population, we're living longer in the United States. Well, that's not true. Infant mortality is way down. So if you take out infant mortality old numbers, when they're on average, depending on the decade, but going back 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago, 30, 40% of children would die by the age of 5. If you take those numbers out, we aren't living as long. Look at Russia. They're living to like 52 now. This is going on by design by the social planners. Dr. Blaylock, please continue. You had gotten to 1950. They go totally international with it. Please continue.
Well, as I said, they turned over the domestic behavioral sciences to the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation and its Carnegie corporate foundation turned their attention to the international arena to promote this social engineering. What Rockefeller in 1920 coined the science of man. Basically, it was eugenic because he was funding the majority of the eugenic organizations in the world in the 1910, 1920 period. Well, the Ford Foundation essentially is controlled by Rockefeller Foundation. Virtually all the major foundations are controlled by the Rockefeller Foundation. The way they did that is they had their people put in as trustees of these other foundations, and eventually they took over control. So by interlocking, most of the major foundations, now the Bill Gates Foundation, is directly and indirectly controlled by the Rockefeller Foundation. Well,
now let me bring up the sources on that. The church hearings in Congress, as you know, in the 70s, went into the interlocking directorates and the different foundations. And another way, the Rockefellers, by controlling government, if they didn't like a foundation or they didn't play ball, they could sick regulators on them to selectively enforce rules to break them up or bring them under Rockefeller allied control. Go ahead.
Right, and by regulating and controlling most of the major foundations, then they could have block grants, which they did. They directed their projects together toward a certain type of research. For instance, they were very interested in behaviorism, which is psychological control in human engineering, psychobiology. So by using that mass block of money, the other foundations were just very small and of no consequence. But they train these physicians in the United States by targeting certain institutions, for instance, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Duke University, University of Wisconsin, were targeted to be their institutions, Caltech. And so they filled it with their people, with their agenda, their social planning agenda and social control agenda. And these people eventually became professors as well, or sent their students as professors in the foreign countries. So it's over the period of time since 1901, they've essentially taken over most of the major universities throughout the world through this interlocking directorate. Now, to show how much money these people have, they did something that was even more powerful, and that is they made sure their people became the advisors for the government when the government was giving out money for these things. Because the psychological program funding by the federal government far exceeded the foundations in the 1950s and 60s. But it was the foundations that controlled the various governmental groups that were dispensing the money. So essentially they controlled the government money, which is tax money.
All right, stay there, Doctor. Only a 1-minute break. Come right back to you as we start the fourth and final hour. We're live at prisonplanet.tv. Our guest, Dr. Russell Blaylock, I'm going to put his website up on the screen for you here in a moment, is giving you the basic crash course in brain surgery, in understanding how our society is governed, how the map makers of the mind are controlling our society. Then we're going to go into what they're building, the eugenics operation, the population reduction operation they're carrying out against you and your family, whether you're an FBI agent, a police officer, a bureaucrat. And we're going to get into some of the specific toxins and poisons that have been introduced into our environment. This is a quick segment. We're going to come back in the long segment coming up in the about 5 minutes. But let's continue with Dr. Blaylock. Dr. Blaylock, please continue.
Yeah, and continuing this line of their obsession with this science of changing the human behavior, and what we call eventually behaviorism in the 1948-50 period. For instance, in 1928 at Caltech, they had a biology division. That's where Rockefeller first was funneling his money to create this science of man idea. And it was focused on eugenics, according to Dr. May. And she said that one of the professors there, Ezra Ghazni, was in fact a leader in the eugenic movement. He was in the American Eugenics Society, the American Social Hygiene Society, Eugenics Research Association, and the Human Betterment Society, which was heavily funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And they mailed out tens of thousands of brochures to doctors, teachers, social workers, physicians, university publishers, all these different organizations to make sure that these ideas were in the minds of the American public and acceptable. And just to give you an idea of one of the things that this Dr. Ghazni wrote in Scientific American in 1934, he was urging his readers to embrace Adolf Lorenz, professor of sociology in Vienna, with the idea that sterilization of the unfit would eventually reach all civilized countries as a means, quote, of getting rid of the scum of humanity. So this was a person who was in the Rockefeller Foundation. He was appointed as a professor of this new biology program, molecular biology program at Caltech, and he had a tremendous influence in training of professors that were teaching other biologists and eventually physicians as well. Now, just to give you some of the quotes she gives in the book to show you that this is not just something I'm pulling out of thin air. In her book, she says, in the 1920s, Rockefeller conceived the idea of the science of man agenda. And she says, quote, the motivation behind the enormous investment was to develop human sciences as a comprehensive and applied framework of social control grounded in natural, medical, and social sciences. sciences. Its aim was toward human engineering.